To the curious, the seekers, and also to the experts, welcome. You're listening to Poli-Psych podcast. The Mueller investigation and the Mueller report, very large in the news these days, has many aspects. There were many agendas represented by various people who participated, and today we want to drill down a little bit into the aspect of the Steele dossier, its origins, who was behind it, why they compiled it, and the impact that it has had. So, of course, joining me are Ken, our MBTI specialist. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Cindy.
And Don, our Enneagram specialist.
Hello, Cindy and Ken.
And Don, you have a graphic that you were going to walk us through to help us understand the timeline of the Steele dossier.
Yes, this is the historical events as they occurred, and it's important to break this down because a lot of times things just kind of blend into one big picture, but it is important, the history and what happened when. So chronologically, let's start in April 2016. And in the lower left of the graphic, if you're able to look at it on the screen, Perkins Coie, a law firm representing the Clinton campaign and the DNC, hires Fusion GPS to do opposition research for the presidential race. Next, June of that year, 2016, Fusion GPS hires ex-British spy Christopher Steele to complete what became known as the Trump Dossier. Third, we have a question mark then as far as the time frame goes, but we do know this happened next. Steele compiles the dossier based on info allegedly obtained in part from Russian operatives. And next, in July of 2016, the FBI opens an investigation into the alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And next, we don't have a date on this one, but it involves Director James Comey, FBI director. Steele takes his dossier, later described by then FBI Director James Comey as, quote, salacious and, quote, unverified to the FBI. Later, and against the FBI's wishes, Steele shares the dossier with members of the media. In October 21st, 2016, in the next frame, the FBI and Department of Justice used the dossier to obtain a warrant to surveil the Trump associate Carter Page. Next, May 17th, 2017, the following year, Special Counsel Robert Mueller takes over the probe into alleged collusion between Trump and Russia. And what I want to emphasize after I've read through all of that is that heading at the top, the Trump dossier from opposition research to federal evidence. And that's exactly what happened. What began as opposition research became federal evidence. So that's our introduction there, Cindy and Ken. So I guess we can have that as our timeline to work from.
Now, was the I'm looking at the July 2016 frame, the FBI opening the investigation. That was not revealed at that time. Is that true? The FISA
Yeah,
warrants?
that became known later. I don't think that was known at the time.
So during that time, they were obtaining the 3 FISA warrants and renewing them at
Right.
regular intervals. So that was all kind of going on before, to a private citizen. Current President Trump had not been president, was not president-elect until November 8th or whatever. So spying on a private citizen.
Right. Yeah. Trump became president between the last frame and the next to last. So,
I'm starting to find it interesting that the relationship with Christopher Steele, who I'm actually going to say has more to do with the company Orbis Business Intelligence. I'm not sure if it's easier for people to just say Steele Dossier, and we'll probably stay with that frame in this show, but it really points to a somewhat larger entity that contains a legal representation, a staff, also has, as it states right here on this introductory page, it has a very well set up network of distribution through the media, and they would have worldwide coverage, obviously functioning almost like a intelligence agency would for a sovereign country. And this, in effect, if we do just choose to look at globalism as an entity or a focus or a social gravity point, this would be the intelligence division. And there are many of these companies out there. This is just really a sample of one of them. It's a very involved network. It's a very lucrative field. And the social map would be very interesting if we looked at the connections between the board members and the other tech company board members, perhaps in another show. But here, as it impacts this incident, I'm looking at the Brexit vote, which I believe was June 18th, 2016, which is about the time the relationship was cemented between Christopher Steele and the U.S. entities that were involved, Fusion GPS. And it's just, I guess we won't know yet until if and when, if possible, if we eventually do have Christopher Steele called in to testify, which would be interesting.
Well, one of the things I remember about Christopher Steele when his name first began to be associated with this dossier is that he had not actually been in the field in Russia for a long period of time. And it was only because of his background there that he was involved in this preparation of the dossier. So one of the questions I had in the back of my mind was, well, maybe he's maintained contacts there in Russia that were feeding him information for his intelligence services company. But that remained an open question as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know that there's any information that's come out about that.
Well, if we look at the scope, now we don't know at this point what the scope of Orbis Business Intelligence happens to be, how many employees they have, but one could surmise that they've got pretty deep coverage, and they may have not wanted Christopher Steele to be dirtied up with the actual contact work involved. And one thing I'll stress, I think, as we move forward, even going into the next 6 months or so, their legal staff's almost guaranteed that anything that they did would be, quote, as we say in the U.S., legal. And that might not sound good to everyone listening, but they will probably skate away on this thing because they wouldn't have done what they did without double checking with the legal staff, making sure that it was maybe not the spirit of the law, but the letter of the law was adhered to. And I think a lot of these companies are just there to give political operatives a way to get around statutes in a way that would not be capable of drawing prosecution. Well,
what I was really getting at was the fact that there was the possibility, even in the beginning of the development of this Steele dossier, as it became known to the public, there was always, in my mind, the possibility that, well, how accurate is this thing? Because this guy doesn't have current field experience. Where is this really coming from? So to me, it wasn't so much a question of law as it was, where's the sources here? And why is a non-field operative being given top billing?
Maybe for plausible deniability, which is sort of the keystone of their work. It's just a haze. I think they purposefully have this haze. So we talk about Christopher Steele. Nobody really has ever, beyond sort of the inside baseball people that, the people that read this more frequently, most people don't know of Orbis Business Intelligence and the other individual, Christopher Burrows. I don't anticipate that he was sitting in his office playing solitaire on his computer either. He probably was right there.
Well, what I'm getting at is as I'm comparing this so-called modern day Watergate scandal to the actual data that came out as Watergate was developing. You had reporters that were digging up bits of information that pertained to the larger picture we were being given, and then those snippets would have names and dates attached to them. So and so did this on such and such a date. But I don't see that anything like that has ever really come out of this gathering of intelligence that became known as the Steele Dossier. I think, would have expected some data points to come out about how they constructed this thing. It just seems to have appeared on the scene, and we don't really have anything that is corroborating it, even from within the Orbis company itself.
Right. So essentially, it's a work of fiction at this point.
Yeah, it's certainly, that's certainly a possibility. It doesn't have the earmarks of an actual historical narrative.
Let's look at the backdrop. I think part of this, we're going to have to use our intuition a little bit, perhaps in the absence of that granular information that they may never even if it did exist, which is in doubt, we might never see it. But I think we have to put on our detective hats a little bit and look at, if we could call up the first of the two New Yorker articles. Not that they're authoritative sources of information, but they do reveal the sort of the military doctrine that was behind this. And especially the British have a very sophisticated history in intelligence work and in planning, strategic planning, and so on. And we can kind of get the fingerprints of what that might look like from looking at what they push out to the media. And there is, of course, a lot of tension between Russia and Central Europe and North Central Europe. The British have always had a very keen strategic interest in developments on the continent. And typically that's been the theme in history when the countries were separate, but the EU has introduced this sort of monoculture sitting at the top. It's the ruling elite, so to speak, what we would call in our own slang globalism. And they do need, especially to qualify the existence or justify the existence of NATO, they need to have that tension with Russia, and it's probably warranted. Again, they're heavily armed, and it would be naive to assume that all's well and we can just relax. But at the same time, they might use this point to hype or manipulate the population along political lines, and that's what this article, and I'll just read a little bit. According to Andrew Weiss, a Russia expert at Carnegie Endowment, Russian officials believed that the West had been pursuing a regime change agenda around the world, particularly in Ukraine, worried that Putin's regime might be targeted next. Russia felt they needed to push back hard. They wanted to promote cleavages in the West, and that's where the promotion of populist and nationalist groups, and I think their support of Brexit fits in, unquote. So they did a little mind reading on Russia, and they basically anticipated an aggressive impulse that might very well have been there, but nevertheless there was no proof of that either. But this began to serve as the pretext for demonizing or dirtying up the populist movement, which might have been the primary motive, because again, it does serve the interests of the ruling elite to maintain their structural dominance via the EU. populism on either side, left or right, would be a threat to that status quo.
One of the things I'd like to point out about this quote here is it's very interesting, and it's the stepping back and the looking at two sides as if you're impartial, and that's the role that I see that Andrew Weiss is stepping into here, and he's giving you what appears to be a scholarly overview in which he's saying, well, I can see why Russia would be playing divide and conquer. Well, one of the first things you want to think about strategy-wise is what about the possibility that the people that Andrew Weiss is associated with, what about the possibility that he might be playing divide and conquer by pointing this out, and therefore dividing the people that he says he's that are trying to divide from the other faction, namely the West. So if you didn't want Russia and the West to begin collaboration, then you'd say one of the parties was trying to divide the other so that they could conquer them. Just an alternative narrative possibility I wanted to throw out there, because we don't want to take everything at face value.
Right, and this frame is somewhat plausible. It's not that the reasoning is sound. Let's look at clip 2, because they begin to push that a little further, and they now are starting to go after specifics. So they're kind of up in space with this other theory. Now they're getting down, they're starting to name names. And this is when I think reality and theory begin to diverge a little bit. And again, to make accusations such as, they're showing that people are being, Farage came to public attention in the U.S. shortly after the 2016 elections when they were photographed with President-elect Donald Trump outside his apartment in Trump Tower, unquote. So they're starting to do this sort of image association thing that we see over and over in media. So we're forming that sort of dark intuition in people, or associating images that may be true, but it's just they have to point this out, that it was a Trump Tower, without stating the significance. The rest of that is sort of left to the individual to go down the path that they're suggesting. It's sort of a neurolinguistic pathway. And then a few days later, they met with the Russian ambassador. So they're starting to sort of weave this and weave this web. And this is the reason I pulled this clip out, was they start to weave in specific names to connect it with a theory that was never substantiated, but they're building this sort of intuitive theoretical structure and then linking it back to sense data. So we're into the perceptual. No judging here. They're not judging it. They're not calling Donald Trump a Russian agent or anything like that, but they're beating around that perceptual bush a little bit. And the implication would be, to somebody who wants to believe that's reality. And it's then Steve Bannon, they throw, again, going back to the clip, Steve Bannon is mentioned, and he was labeled with I think the alt-right, that attachment from the original Kessler framing, not Kessler, but the other one, the one who invented the alt-right meme. So that was a psyop also in the U.S. We've already sort of been over that one. Right, Richard Spencer invented the alt-right term, and so linking then Steve Bannon. There's still people out here in this region that believe Steve Bannon is some kind of a white supremacist, but he's really just a kind of a moderate populist, really.
Well, he was actually bankrolled. Most people believe, or at least some sources believe, that a lot of Bannon's funding, independently of Trump, came via the Mercer family, which had been very important in Republican politics, but and decided to back Trump, but probably not with pure motives, probably with their own ulterior agenda. So they wanted to create the impression that Steve Bannon was this almost mythical figure. And when in fact, he had some background, but it was not really as extensive in terms of especially and forming coalitions, which was his weak point. So at any rate, there was, I think, an attempt to create a straw man out of Bannon in which he became an easy target. And to a large extent, that ended up proving true. But that's definitely a side note.
Yeah, and I think at that point, we have the narrative fairly well established, and it appears to kind of step off from there. And we've got then the emergence of the tighter relation between the Steele, Orbis Steele axis, and then the people in the U.S. and the intelligence community, and it just sort of built one on top of the other. But I'll introduce it now, is I believe the Steele dossier itself they already knew that it would fail. We talked about this offline a little bit, is that when someone presents a false story or false witness, the only two entities that know that it's false are the person accused, who would in this case be President Trump, and the other person who makes the assertion, Christopher Steele, let's say, or Orbis. And we haven't quite gotten to the end of this yet as far as determining whether or not that's true, but it's starting to look from the results of the Mueller investigation that this story was, in fact, fabricated. There's nothing at this point that we've run across, that anyone's run across, that would disprove that assertion. And
the whole framing of this thing, I think we probably want to point out that if it was an, quote, insurance policy, it wasn't really intended to function long term. It was only intended to get enough traction to keep Trump from becoming president, and its long-term viability was never really something that was expected to stand scrutiny.
Well, maybe they expected the Access Hollywood tape to really finish that off. So the British intelligence services probably knew, maybe even better than we did, that President Trump would probably win. I don't think.
Well, I kind of see that as a 1-2 punch, that they probably didn't think that he could withstand both of these accusations, the Putin's puppet accusation and the P-word grabbing accusation.
Well,
it was kind of a double whammy that was amazing to a lot of people that he withstood.
I'm going to go on, and this is just my personal opinion. I thought that the targeting Trump part of this was just a beneficial outcome that might or might not happen. And because, again, I go back to this sort of the interior psychology of the fact that Christopher Steele, if we identify him as the author, knew this was fake. If in fact it's not borne out as true, then it must be false. So I am going to engage in some binary logic. So Christopher Steele knows that it's false. He also is, I would say we could agree that he's a sophisticated intel personality, and he's got a staff that sits around the table gaming this thing all day, and they probably arrived at the conclusion that they will be found out. This will come out as being falsified at some point. Why did they still do it? And my assertion is that they were really trying to beat down this populism uprising, at least to gain some time. And the really damaging part to personally, and again, it's just my own theory, is that they were also trying to rupture U.S.-Russian relations, which in essence would have made these people, an enemy entity, really, is they're interfering in our own foreign policy. Russia is considered an adversary, but there are constructive ways of approaching that issue besides having a intervention by a foreign power. Britain is a foreign power, even though they're an ally, but they're not acting like an ally here. I think they're looking out after their own self-interest, and they're also at the same time strengthening the EU, which might or might not be in the best interests of the U.S., but it's certainly not in the best interests of the populist political opinion, which is, it deserves open and fair-minded dialogue between the two sides. to arrive at the conclusion. But they were trying to sort of gin up the system to demonize the populist movement. And I think most importantly, and this probably did contribute, they were dragging out the Brexit. They were creating enough clouds in the wind here to obscure the Brexit vote, to create this boogeyman in the form of Russia, to help also legitimize the demonizing of the Brexit itself as being a risk to national security. But the sad part is the social effect it's had on the U.S. After all this time. The Steele dossier itself created it basically made our political system inert, which still, it's just, Congress is not functioning currently. And it's essentially a prank, but it's not the kind of funny prank like the prank phone call that we heard from the Russian comedians.
Hi, all right, I'm going to put Mr. Schiff on the phone, and then I guess, are you going to transfer him to Mr. Parubi?
Yes, of course.
Great, thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, Mr. Schiff. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Yes.
Olga Buzova is a friend of the reporter Sobchak?
Yes, she's a friend of a reporter, and I think the special agent of Russian Secret Service, Ksenia Sobchak.
That Sobchak is or Olga is?
No, Sobchak is Ksenia.
Okay, and so Buzova met with Trump in New York at some point after the 2013 Miss Universe
yes.
pageant.
Absolutely, and she got compromising materials on Trump after their short relations.
Okay, and what's the nature of the compromise?
Well, there were pictures of naked Trump.
The interesting thing about it is the way Schiff starts the call kind of like, not as engaged in it, but then he gets like, wait, it's almost like you can hear him thinking, well, wait, let me find a pen. I have to write all this down. He gets more enthusiastic about it, and he just gets sort of reeled into this thing. And because he wanted to believe it was true.
At the time that this came out, I remember, wasn't there a Sacha Baron Cohen spoof phone call shortly before this?
I don't know, but it's the same style. And these guys Sacha, everybody sort of got used to Sacha Baron Cohen because the Borat thing was getting kind of old, which is why it's so surprising that Schiff fell for this. And I don't have a very high, frankly, I think I don't know how he got the job of being intelligent. It's just kind of funny.
Has something to do with a Standard Hotel, I think.
But his just the intelligence, I don't think so. So he's a good speaker. He conducts the call, but it just sort of that manipulation. And I'm still feeling that that's what the Brits did to us. Is they told the intelligence people what they wanted to hear. They had to listen. They had to listen. They couldn't just say, you're full of baloney, get out of here. And Schiff couldn't say that either. But then they skillfully hooked Schiff. You're comedians. They're just, but they phrase it just enough to make just enough credit, have just enough credibility, but whatever portion or not, there's certain portions of it that are just in hindsight are really funny, but it's actually illustrative.
Yeah, my favorite part was when Schiff says, well, you would be able to back this up with evidence, right? And they said, oh, yes, absolutely. No, he should have hung up right there and said, okay, send it to me. I'll talk to you after I've got it.
Yeah. But, well, now he couldn't, I'm trying to look at both sides. And they said this about Mueller too, and it's hard to take, but these guys have to listen. They have to listen to everything, and they have to sort of play along. But I kind of reading between the lines as to how Schiff's attitude changed over the course of it. Like you can hear him writing things down, and these guys throw out enough details. We have pictures of naked Trump.
Yes.
It's like Borat. This,
I think the safeguard, though, the balance is that we ourselves, coming from our point of view, are very anxious to believe things that back up what we believe.
It has more to do with Britain looking out after its own interests and not treating the U.S. in a constructive manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that the track record is actually supports what you're saying there. I'm thinking back to how there was various, I'm not sure how many, I think there was at least two Scottish referendums to leave the, I'm not sure if it was the UK or to become independent. It might have actually been that. And they kept having the referendum until it went the way that the controllers wanted it to go, which was for Scotland to remain, because a big incentive, but not the whole reason that they wanted it to remain, was all of the offshore oil up there in Scotland, so in the North Sea. So there's a lot of I think you could say there's a track record of the people that serve as so-called unifying factions, serve to unify different factions to form a global conglomerate of nations that becomes powerful, and then they put themselves in the positions of power to regulate those entities that have come together for a stated beneficial purpose. And Scotland's one example that I can think of. And I think they did just want to stall out Brexit and have it keep repeating until the people changed their mind and said, okay, we don't really want to leave the EU. And I think that they saw this populism rising in America and in England as a threat to their goal of forming these conglomerates that grew ever bigger and with ever more interconnecting layers.
So we're making some assertions, but in any situation, until there's factual evidence, we have to use our intuition. We have to use it responsibly, but we do look at how the press was impacted by this, and the first leaks started to come out, and in fact, it was even regarded, I believe, one or two of the FISA warrants were obtained based upon Christopher Steele's leak to, I think, Yahoo News. And as Lionel Nation said, was the Onion unavailable? So we're on the New Knowledge landing page, and completely legal. Everything they do is, we're not casting aspersions on their legality as much as maybe the ethics, or at least reader beware as to the effect that these companies do have on media. And I think the most surprising aspect of what they reveal here is that they were created by experts in national security, as they say, machine learning. We protect brands and industries from online campaigns that manipulate narratives and damage reputation. It's a revealing statement. And I would assert that they're actually manipulating narratives and damaging reputation at the same time, depending upon who they're working for. And they're obviously going to work in the best interests of their client. And the client could be a private industry or interest or a political interest. And they're headquartered in Austin, Texas. They were the first organization outside the U.S. intelligence community to identify Russia's campaign to influence the 2016 presidential election, unquote. So they're stating that as a matter of fact, as the predicate of the sentence, which is an interesting presentation. So the reader is sort of drawn into that cognitive frame. If they're reading uncritically, it's just that's the way life is. Going back to the text, our leadership has testified before Congress, advised the State Department and the NSA, and worked in counterterrorism, unquote. That's kind of a scary statement, because here we have we're in a gray area between government, which for the people, by the people, and private industry working in security. So where does the corporate interest start and the public interest leave off? And this is one of the problems with these, I'm just going to call them NGOs. Even though they're businesses, there are NGOs that are for profit, and there are NGOs that are tax exempt entities also. And they both sort of operate in this gray area where influence is pooled and where funds are pooled and directed towards an objective based on what the client wants. And the client is usually not the citizen. And just an example of that, we had a tweet on our Twitter page a while back pointing to a different field of endeavor, and it was on the 5G rollout. And there was some debate about the health of 5G. Aside from that, we see obviously there's a 5G client who's paying New Knowledge to deal with their adverse publicity. And so, interestingly, in the photograph, you see that the headline on the New Knowledge page, it was clipped right from their page on the site, your 5G phone won't hurt you, but Russia wants you to think otherwise. So they're weaving in the Russia narrative into 5G phones. And I did look at the article, and basically they go into the link between Russia and the network RT, which, I don't know, I guess they probably wouldn't run counter to Russian interests, but still it's kind of a guilt by association situation. I think they basically do try to function as a separate entity. It's debatable, but yet they're bringing in all these things that really aren't relevant to the technology behind the 5G. And then we also see interestingly, the headline below that is the New York Times article. You can see the slanted, I think it's a Times New Roman. They have a very special type style, very recognizable, and it has credibility, psychological credibility, yet they're lifting the same headline. And then their byline is RT America, a network known for sowing disinformation. That's just an aside, but it's really the main point. Has a new alarm: the coming 5G apocalypse. So they're defending their corporate client. I think it's pretty self-evident what they're doing here. I'm not up on the debate of whether 5G is good or bad, but I'd really be more interested in a newspaper that laid this out in an objective manner. And the New York Times, for the New York Times to stoop to this level, that's a bit of a problem. I think we sometimes call it the fifth estate or the fourth estate. And this isn't really freedom of the press. It's something else, but it's not news.
Well, I think they know that most Americans, or the people who are reading the articles, are not technically inclined, and they can get by with glossing over what they believe to be true. And it doesn't really matter whether the person that's writing this believes it to be true or not. I am missing the days where you had a science expert, say, being interviewed by a reporter, and then the reporter his job was to put it in everyday English. Well, it kind of looks to me like they've completely bypassed that. I'm not getting anything like that on this 5G debate at all from the New York Times or anybody. It really has fallen to the alternative media to begin to try to actually delve into these things and put some complex science into the language of the everyday man, because the mainstream media certainly isn't doing that job anymore.
I don't think our founding fathers, when they crafted the Bill of Rights, really anticipated the influence that corporations would come to have. I think they did a great job of protecting us from overbearing government. But I think that people who profit from controlling and even manipulating public opinion have found ways to sidestep our law that is meant to protect us from harmful, powerful influences. And having done that, I think that it's not only corporations that use these methods, but also political operatives. So, in effect, what has happened is things that again, the founding fathers were seeking to protect us from in the United States. We are completely vulnerable to many of those threats, because it's not the power now is not in the hands of government, but the power is in the hands of corporations.
Seems to be the point of the EU movement as well, is to create this almost super organism of control above the sovereign countries, and when they team up with the multinational corporations under common interest, really, which is, I think we could see it play out right here. And then when they combine that with the technology and skill that's acquired in intelligence work and then do it for profit. And I think there's a network of these companies out there, both the tactical influence interfacing with the press in this manner, and then the concept development itself would happen in a company like Orbis. And we've lived through 2 years of societal hell with this Russia investigation, and we're still going through it. And it probably will be a historical archetype. And at some point, I think there was for those of us who I follow Q as kind of an entertainment medium, but there was a drop about the movie of the future about all this, and it's probably, we're living through it. We don't see it coming, but there will be, just like there were movies about the McCarthy era, this may even be bigger. It's gone on for longer, and we're not even halfway through it yet.
Yeah, I can't help but think that that it is, as you said, tied to this rise of corporations that, as Cindy was saying, that the founders hadn't foreseen. It's really goes to me, in my mind, under the banner of truth is for sale and to the highest bidder. And whoever controls the flow of big money is the one who gets the results. At least they're the ones who gets their narratives pushed, because it takes money to push a narrative. The truth will come out eventually, but if the truth has to push against a narrative that has a lot of money behind it, that can employ new knowledge and other people to push that narrative, it's going to take a while for that to overcome. And that's, again, as Ken said, that's what we're living through, and it isn't fun.
I think that one of the real struggles related to this issue is that many people, just ordinary people, and even probably a lot of business people, are not really fully aware that this layer of public relations exists, and that puts people who aren't aware of this at a severe disadvantage. And not only does it put people competing for business at a disadvantage, I think it really puts the public at a disadvantage, because for the most part, I don't know if I want to use the word naive or innocent. I guess there's a naivete in the public. I don't think most people realize that there are entire corporations who exist to alter their way of thinking and even their belief system. So I'm not sure what kind of answer there is, other than to inform people as much as possible that there are these kind of corporations and that there are these agendas.
Well, that'll probably be the takeaway from this episode that we've lived through, and hopefully it's a constructive takeaway. And the antidote really is just to look at this objectively, even looking at every word of an article, or listening with intuition rather than just taking on taking facts as given. I think we're all used to that. Turn on the news, and the news is the news. It's an objective entity, and maybe it will become that way in the future, but we're going to have to live through the effect of this incident. And I hope we learn our lesson from this as a country, and certainly the Poli-Psych podcast will be here to try to move through this as well and provide as much light as we can. And certainly click the like button and subscribe and follow us on Twitter. And thanks for coming today, everyone. Have a closing thought.
Yeah, I guess the parting thought that I would want to leave people with is that there is what seems to be an attempt to paint nationalism in a negative light, and nationalism is merely just guarding your own territory. It isn't offensive, it's actually defensive, and there's nothing wrong with a strong defense, and a big part of that strong defense needs to be the ability to understand the information world that we're living in. We're living in a new world that's very much controlled by information. So that doesn't mean we need state-run media. That means we need to be able to have the freedom to recognize the truth, and not have nationalist interests undermined by those that are posing to expose other nationalists. It gets a very confusing world we're living in now, but at the bottom line, it's simple. It's truth, and we need to use all of our resources to continue to find and support the truth.
Since we're coming up on Memorial Day, we hope that everyone has a pleasant 3-day weekend. Until next time, take care.